is Bandukda, and his co-author, Mr. A. Majeed, is also here. The title is The Impact of Globalization on Textile Trade, Myths and Realities. Bandukda has a PhD from UNIS in the United Kingdom, and his research is based on the control system application in textile engineering in his PhD. He joined the Textile Institute of Pakistan in 1994 and has worked there since that time in various capacities. Presently, he is looking after the academic affairs of the undergraduate programs being offered in TIP in textile science, textile management, marketing, and textile design and technology. Zubair.
Just to give you an overview of our presentation, start with the introduction, world textile and clothing trade. Okay, it's really impossible to talk about the whole globalization in 15 minutes or so. So what we feel we're going to do is to just pinpoint a few points and hopefully start some kind of discussion, because this is an area which is quite writing about it, talking about it a lot. And countries such as ours, which is Pakistan, is affected a lot by this whole issue of globalization. Now, trade is probably one of the earliest of the economic activities undertaken by humans. It is impossible nowadays to envisage a world without trade, not only commodities, but in exchange of ideas, information, entertainment, and even culture. What is becoming increasingly difficult is to differentiate between what is indigenous and what is imported. And even the concept of religion and value addition is ever changing. This is more so in textiles, where we know that a raw material which is grown in one part of the world goes through different countries and ends up in totally different countries, going through various stages of production. For example, in the clothing and the textile and clothing sector, some of the Far Eastern countries and Asian countries who have no fiber growing capacities in cotton and wool and other natural fibers have emerged as major suppliers of textile products. And this has been discussed today in a couple of, let's say, the New and So paper in the morning. They were talking about Egyptian cotton. So the point is that just because we have certain raw material doesn't mean that we have advantages. So we need to look into that. Although trade has been there for a long time, the concept of globalization is a more recent one. Again, this also carries different meanings. For some, it may be news, ideas, and entertainment being across borders via satellite, while for others, it may be receiving, sending faxes and emails. But in the economic sense, globalization basically refers to the process of increasing global trade in goods and services and better access to world markets and lower tariffs for all nations. This description implies that all countries will benefit equally from the globalization process, but of course, the world is made up of a heterogeneous mix of countries at varying degrees of development and resource endowment. The role of financial institutions such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and particularly the WTO are going to become very crucial in how the globalization progresses. Just to summarize or give a definition of globalization, we can probably describe it as a movement or exchange of resources across countries without any national barriers. Now, these institutions of global governance basically go back to about 1940 were created, and the prime objective was to create them to maintain financial stability, to promote trade, and to usher in an era of global development. And many things came up. The multi-fiber arrangement was one of them, which now, with the new agreement on textiles and clothing, this new agreement has the MSP quotas, but the idea is to remove them in about 10 years, and this will come around 2005. Now, while the earlier policies of these institutions were based on a spirit of cooperation, today they are facing certain problems. For example, this is not what I feel, but anyway, if you look at the foreign direct investments in the world, this was in 1999, the World Bank accounted for only 1%, whereas in IMF it's a negative influence, it's foreign direct investment. So we need to look at that. So coming to the world textile and clothing trade, the growth of world population and the consumption patterns in developed countries have a marked effect on the global trade of textiles and clothing. There has not only been an inevitable increase in the trade of textiles to meet the demand, but the composition of textile trade has also gone through certain significant changes. Two charts here. What's happened to the color work? This is the total trade, and this was about just over $350 billion in year 2000. And what you see is that there's a much larger proportion of the clothing trade as compared to the textile trade. Approximately 60% now is the clothing, whereas the rest is 40%. But more important is the second chart, which is basically showing you in the last 10 years the growth in the textile and clothing. There's hardly any change in the textile trade, just maybe about 2 or 3%. But clothing has gone from almost doubled. It's actually just about doubling in the last 10 years. Now, more importantly, the significant development has been the shift in the world trading pattern, particularly in certain Asian countries, China, Indonesia, South Korea, and Bangladesh, with almost 50% of the textiles and 70% of the clothing exports originating from these countries. The WTO estimates are that by the year 2005, we will have total trade in textile and clothing of $500 billion, and 70% of that would be clothing. Now, China is already accounting for a major share of the world textile and clothing trade, and its recent entry into WTO may affect certain other Asian countries. Another important factor here is also the fact that USA and the European market, or the European Union, account for nearly 60% of the total imports, which very clearly reflects the importance of these two markets in the global textile and clothing scenario. The share of USA and EU in global clothing trade is far greater, almost 75% as compared to the textile trade, referring to the increasing labor costs in these economies. This has resulted in a shift of production of value-added articles, including apparel, from developed to developing countries. You know, this is specifically to the South Asian, what is called the SAARC region, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. And these are figures of the mid-90s, but it has not changed in terms of it. And what this is showing is the percentage of the total exports countries. You see countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan, almost 70%, or just under 70% of the total export earnings are from textile and clothing trade. What this means is that although textile and clothing trade may form a very small fraction of the global trade, but for these economies or for these countries it is very important, and the impact they may have on the jobs and livelihoods of millions of workers across this region. This is due to the fact that even after a lot of automation, the textile and clothing industry remains one of the most labor intensive, particularly the clothing sector, and especially in the developing countries. So given these trends, the gradual phasing out of quotas by 2005 holds important consequences for South Asia's share of world trade in textile and clothing sector. It is expected that there will be a tremendous opportunities for these countries to increase their share in the global trade, as they are the lowest cost producers and are currently severely restricted by quotas. However, the overall trend is downward for countries with labor-intensive, low-technology manufacturing methods, as they are experiencing a similar pace to those of primary commodities. Furthermore, such a narrow export base leads to high export exposure risk, with swings in cotton prices, production failures, loss due to drought, disease, and pesticide. Now, one of the important developments of globalization has been the forming of regional trading blocs. And the impact of globalization is that due to increasing competition, textile and clothing producers in the developing countries are under more pressure to cut production costs. Such trends in the future will bring on pressure the movement towards the regional trading blocs. World trade and the textile trade being part of it is increasingly being divided into regional blocs, and a number of such blocs have come up in recent years. EU, NAFTA, ASEAN, SAARC, ECO are some to name. These regional trading agreements have become very popular, and since the inception of the WTO, 90 such agreements have come into existence, covering trade of various goods and services. However, not all the trading blocs will have the economic strength such as, say, EU, which has a number of developed countries within it. Hence, the fear is that globalization is likely to cause further inequalities and increase poverty among the poor nations. Although the regional economic groups have gained substantial strength and are expanding towards almost half of world trade, there are inherent potential risks for multi-traded trading systems. The globalization policy of WTO, that is, the free and liberalized trade, is likely to come into conflict with parallel trading agreements, progressively being enlarged and regional agreements being focused to seek better security of access and adjust to more competitive situations and be better equipped to compete on globalization. The question is, what should be the exact role of such regional cooperations in a tariff-free world? There is a danger of these trading blocs will become stumbling blocks in the smooth flow of trade under the rules of the WTO, as there would be a removal of tariffs for some countries and not others. Quickly looking at the impact of globalization on the textile trade. In the early 90s, many advocates of globalization envisaged an integrated world, which would have greater uniformity in terms of development, and it was predicted that more equitable distribution of the world's resources between the developed and developing countries would result. It was argued that opening trade, international trade would provide opportunities to the developing countries to catch up with the developed countries in terms of economic development as well as political and technological sophistication. The theory was based on the assumption that many industries of the developing countries would have wider access to the developed markets, and that the industrialists from the latter would invest to take advantage of cheaper resources, thereby providing employment and economic uplift generally. However, the single market program of EU in industries such as textile, for example, has placed South Asian countries at a disadvantage in the EU market. And the removal of trade barriers for Mexico and NAFTA will further add to the problem of South Asian textile producers. It is likely that lower transport costs will increase competitiveness of Mexico, but there are some supply side constraints which may limit Mexico's ability to place third country exports in the North American market. These are some of the figures I've made for foreign direct investment, but since we don't have time, I think quickly go to conclusion and recommendations. The concept of globalization is very good, but that's in theory. You have a lot of problems with the actual practical problems of implementing the globalization. Increasingly, it is being seen as a double-edged sword, where on the one hand it holds out the promise of greater economic prosperity through better market access, but on the other it reduces employment opportunities for labor by encouraging capital-intensive methods of production. In addition, the drive for lower costs usually means cutting back on social security provisions of the workforce, pushing an increasing number of people below the poverty line. So what can be done? The international institutions can play an important role in raising issues such as more funding for training and development of workforce, shifting from primary education and basic literacy towards tertiary and professional education. I think the point our first speaker made about universities, I think it's very important. Sometimes in the developed world, whenever there is funding, and I work with a lot of projects, the priority areas are given to primary education. That's fine, but we need to provide technical professional education also, because if you want to really bring about a change, you have to have universities and you have to have higher educational institutions in those parts of the world so that you can provide that kind of thing. Better policies of infrastructure development, greater exchange of ideas and data on trade. So this is just a quotation from one of our former ministers, late Dr. Majeed-Parallel. What is crucial for poor nations is equitable access to global market opportunities, not charity. What we must insist today is a comprehensive package from rich nations for imposing immigration control, since free labor flows were supposed to be an essential component of a liberal economic system, which would equalize global opportunities. So what does future hold for countries as before? As a result of the brave group trade round launched in Doha, it seems inevitable that they will experience even more inequality in the future, not less. That the markets will become progressively dominated by the multinational corporations rather than by strong local or national producers, and that poverty and insecurity will rise. This challenge has become even more difficult and urgent in the world is trying to come to terms with everything. Thank you.